Family and friends, neighbors, and most of all, strangers, welcome to the Christian Chronicle podcast. We're bringing you voices that speak to ideas, issues, and stories that Church of Christ congregations and members encounter today as they seek to practice the life of Jesus Christ in the places where God plants them around the world. I'm btirwin. May what you are about to hear honor God and illuminate you. 1 in 4 Protestant pastors in the United States has given serious thought to quitting ministry in the past year. That is according to the latest research from the Barna Group, released in January 2026. Among the top reasons ministers think about getting out is burnout. That is a chronic condition in which the minister experiences emotional, intellectual, physical, and spiritual exhaustion that comes from long-running, nonstop, unmanaged stress. Now, burnout is a big deal, not only for ministers and their families, but for congregations too. Ministers in burnout are less effective in their pastoral, preaching, and teaching roles. They're more vulnerable to temptations that can destroy their families, ministries, and the reputation of the church. And Barna research shows that congregational health is a product of, among other things, the health and stability of a congregation's ministry leaders. High turnover and volatility among ministry leaders leads to high turnover and volatility among the people in the pews. So what might congregations and their ministers do to prevent or recover from burnout? Our guest today wrote his doctoral dissertation on that very subject. Dr. Darrel Sears is Associate Professor of Bible and Ministry at York University in York, Nebraska. He's a 23-year congregational ministry veteran in the Church of Christ community, and he has personal experience with burnout, finding himself almost reduced to a pile of smoldering cinders in 2019. That experience led to his doctoral work and the creation of Thrive, a program that helps ministers prevent or recover from burnout. He's risen from the ashes, and he is here with us today. Darrel, ministers everywhere, thank you for being our guest.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's start with this. Burnout may mean different things to different people. You wrote a doctoral dissertation on it, and so for the purpose of this conversation, how do we define burnout here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was a little frustrated in some of my research because it's kind of an ambiguous term. But burnout as we know it today kind of started back in the 1970s. There was an American psychologist by the name of Herbert Freudenberger. Say that 3 times fast. But Herbert Freudenberger, he is a psychologist in New York, and he worked a lot with practitioners who worked alongside of drug addicts. And so in a journal titled Staff Burnout, one of the first times we hear it in the 1970s, Freudenberger describes the loss of caring and compassion he noticed amongst practitioners working with drug-addicted clients. So at the time, addicts were the ones that were classified as burnouts because of their lack of care for anything other than getting their next fix.
Wow.
However, Freudenberger observed the weary and exhausted practitioners that they were displaying similar lack of care with their clients. So Freudenberger was the first to describe burnout as a psychological syndrome that progressively made practitioners and volunteers less committed or amotivated and emotionally depleted. And so you find that burnout happens a lot in the helping professions.
Yeah.
You know, among psychologists, therapists, first responders, police officers, and of course, ministers. And in helping professions, you get into ministry because you want to help people. And typically there are people that have problems, right? And so you want to help people with their marriages. You want to help people with their kids. You want to tell people about Jesus Christ because you want the lost to be saved. But there's an interesting thing that happens in these helping professions, particularly in ministry. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The very reason you get into ministry, when you get exhausted and depleted, those same people that you wanted to help are the people that are driving you crazy.
Yeah.
You feel guilty when saying no and exhausted when you're saying yes.
Yes.
And so burnout comes from this idea of there being a lack or a depletion. You just don't have the wherewithal or the capacity within you anymore to kind of help with these problems that you originally got into this ministry to help with. So that word lack comes up a lot. There's a study by University of South Wales in Australia that did a word cloud, and the word lack is the biggest word that stands out, like this depletion.
Yeah.
And from my studies of interviewing ministers for my dissertation work, the word heavy came up a lot. You can't turn ministry off. It's always with you. So you feel this burden and this heaviness. And so what do you do when you feel lacking and depleted, but also this heaviness upon you, this responsibility?
Wow.
And it can just wear on you. And pop culture kind of has its own definition of burnout a little bit, mainly just meaning that you're stressed out. The World Health Organization actually gave it an official diagnosis back in 2019.
Really?
Where they just call it a chronic workplace stress that has not been managed. And so I think that takes some unpacking, but it's interesting that the World Health Organization finally recognizes it as at least a syndrome that needs to be managed.
I work at a Christian community development organization in the city, and I've been leading a program for our neighbors who are underemployed or unemployed. And, there are some long days involved with that because I work all day and then I'll teach classes at night. And when I come home, I get home at like 9:30 at night and my brain is just dead and I'm exhausted. And all I can do is just kind of turn on the TV and kind of zone out before I go to bed. And so what is the difference between just being tired and not feeling like doing anything and having burnout? I mean, is burnout is it a clinical diagnosis that someone can get? How do you know when it's more than just I'm tired and I need a vacation?
I don't know if it's real easy to diagnose somebody who's saying you're burnt out. I think one of the biggest things would be it's chronic or perpetual, like it lasts. So if you're a youth minister and you do a big youth rally or a lock-in, you come home and you're depleted and tired.
Right.
That's just exhaustion.
Yes.
But if every day when you go to work, you're like, I got to find the energy to do this, and it's emotionally draining all the time, and being in that space where you do ministry, being around people, if that is draining to you, I'm not necessarily talking about like introvert, extrovert kind of thing, but as I said, you get into ministry to help people, but now if going out and helping people is what is always exhausting you, draining you, you'd rather be anywhere else. That's probably a bigger sign of burnout. And another thing is that burnout has a context within the workplace or the people that you're working with. And so when I went through my own burnout journey back in 2019, I didn't know what to call it. I just thought, am I depressed? Am I being unfaithful to the Lord? Because I've been called to do this ministry. And now I feel like I just don't really want to be around people. Yeah. And let me just state that I had a really good congregation that I was working with. Great people, great eldership that a lot of people didn't have, but I didn't know what to call it. And so as I was looking it up, only about 49%, according to that University of South Wales study, of people that are interviewed in helping professions also experience depression. And so burnout and depression are not necessarily the same thing. And the easiest way you can tell whether you're burnout or depressed is, as I said, burnout has a context. So if you gave me 2 plane tickets in a hotel room and I can go to the Bahamas and sit on a beach and I become myself again, I perk up, I'm nicer to my family, I'm wanting to have conversations, that's probably a sign of burnout because I've been taken out of the context. Now, if you're a person that deals with depression, I can sit on that same beach in the Bahamas, but still feel overwhelmed, still feel that anxiety. Nothing is getting better. So depression is context less, doesn't have a context where burnout typically does.
I was thinking about my dad, who he burned out hard. Like I've never known anyone in my life who crashed harder than my dad did at the top of his ministry career when he was 53. And one of the things I noticed, because my dad was the kind of person that just wanted to help people. And the bigger his congregation grew and the more ministries he was involved in, the more people he was interfacing with on a day-to-day basis. And he was getting angrier and angrier, like the frustration, not the frustration that he was mad at people. I think he was frustrated because he wanted to help every person he encountered,
right,
and he couldn't. And so the demands on him increased. And I just noticed that he was lashing out more. He was just on a hair trigger, just angry all the time. So are there any other symptoms that either a minister might identify in herself or himself, or that a church might notice about a minister that would indicate, okay, this is a red flag that burnout may be happening here?
The big guru in occupational burnout is a woman by the name of Christina Maslach, Maslach. And you can look up, she's got tons of books that I used in my research, but she created a burnout inventory, which was used in the 80s and 90s. It's since been changed, and some people like it, some people don't. She and her partners in that inventory came up with what they call, or what I call, the big three. I've talked about it already, which is exhaustion. But the second one is depersonalization, or some detachment. And that usually comes with a lot of cynicism. You're very cynical about the people you work with.
Yeah.
And the third one is reduced personal accomplishment, or feeling like what I do just doesn't matter anymore. Now, you don't have to have all three of those to be burnt out, but at least one of those three is going to be present. So exhaustion, and with exhaustion comes compassion fatigue. You know, your give a care meter. Some people would use stronger language than that, but your give a care meter tends to break. And the people that I said you once wanted to help are now the people that are just draining you, and you don't feel a sense of urgency to help, or you're kind of numb to their problems. So that's compassion fatigue that goes along with the exhaustion. With the depersonalization, or being cynical, you find yourself just being negative all the time, callous, excessively detached responses to various aspects of the job. And that's kind of a defense mechanism, rather than you're trying to preserve yourself. But by doing that, you're pointing it towards other people and say, you know, if they would just get their act together, if they wouldn't be so needy, if they would have done this instead of that, how many times have I told them that if they would just, and so you become very cynical about what other people are saying or doing. But then another defense mechanism with this reduced personal accomplishment is turning things in on yourself. I'm powerless. I just have a lack of achievement and productivity. I feel very inadequate. My burnout occurred about year 9 in my preaching ministry. And that's longer than I'd ever been at a congregation. And I started thinking, why am I preparing a sermon? I feel like I've said everything I can say. I feel like people aren't listening anymore. I feel like maybe I don't have anything worthwhile to give. And those things completely weren't true. My congregation was very welcoming to my sermons, I felt like. But I just kind of started turning things in on me and thinking, maybe I'm the problem. You asked the question, well, how can the congregation tell if their minister is experiencing burnout? That's a good question, because I think stress and anxiousness might be a tipping point. When you see someone that's stressed or anxious all the time, some of us are just prone to anxiousness more than others. I'm a person that has stress and anxiousness, and I think that anxiousness can trigger burnout quicker than persons that are not as anxious. But if you see a lot of cynicism or cynical talk in your minister, that could be a big warning sign. I love the church. It's the body of Christ. But I found myself talking about the church in overly negative ways. So look for cynicism. I think also escapism. If there's a way, if your minister is trying to isolate themselves more than normal, I think that's a huge red flag of just wanting to be away from people. Now, I think there's a difference between solitude and isolation. We go into solitude to be with God so we can come back and be ready to be with people. Whereas isolation just says, get me away from people. And that's where we binge watch Netflix or something just to get our mind off of these things. It's like a coping mechanism. So escapism would be a red flag to me. But I also just think, and you can't always tell this in a person, but what is their devotional life like? So for me, and I know for many people I've talked to, I would do a lot of things for God in a typical day of ministry, but I did hardly anything from God's presence. You know what I mean? Doing things for God rather than from God. And I'm focusing on feeding other people, but I was spiritually anorexic. I was not feeding myself.
At your congregation, when you burned out in 2019, looking back on that now, did anybody from that congregation say, you know what, I noticed this about you, Darrel, but I didn't know what it was?
The person that, the typical person in the pew would have really noticed it a lot. I think my elders did.
Yeah.
I think those that I was closer to in the congregation, some that I would call my inner circle, they definitely knew about it because I would just tell them. But I've always tried to be a preacher that's pretty transparent, maybe even to a fault. As I started coming out of burnout a little bit, I started doing some sermon series on spiritual disciplines, or even talking about joy and how joy can be depleted, and just sharing some of my struggles. And I got a really good response. But I think until I really started preaching on some of those things, I don't know if the congregation would have noticed. I know my family definitely noticed. My wife noticed that I was checked out a lot, but no, I don't think right off the bat that the congregation would have seen that. But definitely those closer to me would have.
You said that burnout and depression are not the same thing. That's an important point. I'm glad you said that. I want to talk a little bit about what we call compulsive sins. It's the number of times that ministers get caught in compulsive sins that ruin their lives, ruin their families, ruin their congregation sometimes, affairs, gambling, sexual abuse, substance abuse, things like that. My theory, and having experience with compulsive sin myself, is that when you're the minister, you have to always be on, right? You have to be in a good mood. You have to look good. You have to say the right thing. Every person that comes to you for help, you smile and you help them. And so you constantly have to live up to this, happy, shiny ideal that we have of ministers. And it gets exhausting to the point where the only relief or respite you get from always being on is a compulsive sin, a drug of choice, as we say. So I don't know if this relates to burnout at all. I feel like it does. How can we make space for ministers to just be human? And have you found a healthier way for ministers to get relief and respite from their public personas?
No, that's a great question. I like what you said about public personas. I had to find a place where I wasn't preacher Darrel, where I was just Darrel.
Yeah.
And so I had lots of Christian friends in my community that I lived in, but that I didn't go to church with.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best things that I did was develop a small group with those people that were Christians but didn't go to my church. Because here's the deal. On a Sunday night, I would go to that community small group and I would walk in, and I was just Darrel. I would lead sometimes, but I was one of like 5 or 6 leaders. But no one looked at me as like the person in charge. I was just a part of that small group community. So life-giving. Beth and I would walk in there. We would just enjoy it. We'd always stay longer than we planned on. And we didn't want to quit the conversation. And when we left on Sunday night, our tanks were full. Like we were recharged. But then on Wednesday night, I would lead a small group for our church, which was a great group of people. But in that group, I was preacher Darrel.
Yeah.
I was the one in charge. I was the one that told people the schedule, that gave the announcements, that said we need this and we need that, And I found myself, as much as I loved those people, drained at the end of the night.
Yes.
And I didn't typically look forward to that small group session. And we did a lot of the same things in both groups. But I had to find a community that I could be a part of, where I was not preacher Darrel, when I was just me. We have to have places where we have confidants, where people are just more cared about us and are loyal to us than loyal to the organization. And so in most spaces in church, we have what I would call allies. There's a book called, I think it's called Resilient Ministry. It's a great book to read. And they talk about the difference between confidants and allies. Allies are good and they are needed, but they're typically within the organization and they share a mission. You are on the same mission, you have the same goals, but typically that person that's an ally cares more about the mission than they do you as the person.
Wow.
And sometimes they are friends, but a lot of times they're not. Where confidants is almost the opposite. They're from outside of the organization, and they are more loyal to you than they are to the mission. And they just want to care about you and find out what's going on with you. And so I think one of the things that has to happen is ministers have to have confidants or networks of people they can go to that are Christians, but outside of the church that they are working with. I had a preacher camp, is what we affectionately called it. Just a bunch of guys would get together for a couple of days of the year, and we would just talk about ministry. I think there's a real fraternity in ministry where I can tell people what's going on in my life as a minister in the congregation, and they can listen, and they listen to understand, but you just don't get it, I think, sometimes unless you're in ministry yourself.
That's right.
And it's great to be around other ministers where you don't have to explain it. They just go, yep, I got you.
That's right.
I've been there and done that. And so I think you have to find your confidants, and you need your allies, but you have to have confidants where you can just be you.
We often talk of the church as a place where you can come as you are, right? And I think ministers have become more self-aware in my lifetime. And so maybe there is the idea among the people in the pews and the minister that the minister can come as he is, so to speak. And so what you might get is minister using the pulpit as therapy, right?
Yeah.
Or emotionally vomiting on the people, or seeking pity, or confessing sins that, and I've seen this, confessing sins that when they, confess them to the congregation, it's more damaging to the congregation.
Yeah, I think you need to be transparent when you're preaching, but you have to be careful.
Yeah. Because
while you want to be real, you still have to be seen as the leader that's taking these people through these problems.
Yeah.
And if it's, if they're like, well, I mean, our preacher up there, he can't figure it out. How am I supposed to figure it out? I have a group of guys. When I was back in Oklahoma, we called ourselves the 2%.
Okay.
And what we meant by that is most people are willing to give you about 98% of what's going on in their life, but it's that little 2% that gets you to 100, where all the situation of what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think I was willing to share, I don't know, maybe about 90% in my preaching with people, but there were certain things that I'm like, if I say what I'm struggling with right now, or if I really speak my mind to what's going on in our culture, it could be more damaging than would be helpful. And so I would save that 2% for those guys in that group. And I would go and they would let me unload. And then I would let them unload of what's going on with them. So you got to be careful who you give the full 100 to. Now, please don't understand that as saying don't be truthful in the pulpit. But I think there are certain things that you might have to hold back for a safer audience, a place that you trust.
I want to switch gears and go back here to the kind of people who get into ministry. You mentioned that earlier on. And they tend to be the kind of people that have natural compassion. And we know that the word compassion means to suffer with. And so getting into ministry is making a move toward suffering with people who are suffering in our congregations and our neighbors, in a role where we ministers believe that suffering has to be part of the deal. How much suffering is too much? And how do we put a limit on compassion, which just feels silly to say, like it feels opposite of Christ-like to say that?
I think we have to look at the whole life of Christ. I've heard sermons on Philippians chapter 2, where it says that Jesus made himself nothing. And that Greek word there is kenosis, self-emptying. And so in order for us to be disciples of Jesus, we have to completely spend ourselves on behalf of others. And I think that's true, but you got to look at the whole life of Christ. While he was self-emptying, he was always self-renewing. If you go back to the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, we don't even get to chapter 2 before we find that Jesus got up early in the morning, went out while it was still dark, and found a solitary place to pray. And before that, back up in chapter 1 of Mark, before he goes into formal ministry, the Spirit sends him out to the desert for 40 days to be alone with his Father to fast and to think about what he's about ready to get into. So he was filling himself up so that he could empty himself out. And, in ministry, there's lots of statistics. I don't have them in front of me, but you can read articles about ministers are some of the worst when it comes to spiritual disciplines and taking care of themselves.
I believe it.
We will take care of others, but we won't take care of ourselves. And sometimes we won't allow others to take care of us. There's a great quote or this conversation that was happening between a guy by the name of Christmas Evans, one of my favorite names in the world.
Yes.
But he was a 19th century Welsh preacher, and he's having this conversation with his friend James Berkeley. And he says, "I'd rather burn out than rust out in service to the Lord." Of course, he wasn't using burnout as a term that we use it today, but maybe talking about like a candle.
Yeah.
But he says, "I'd rather burn out than rust out in service to the Lord." And his friend James said, "Is there not a third alternative? I want neither to burn out or to rust out. I want to finish the race." We're not sprinting. We are in a marathon race, and we have got to take care of ourselves. I was reading a story about a minister who was also a firefighter. And he was saying that if I go into a burning building and I have two brothers standing next to me, we're fighting this fire, and I begin to feel faint or nauseous, and I think I'm going to pass out, the worst thing that I can do is to continue to fight the fire. Because if I do pass out, they have to stop fighting the fire and they have to drag me out. Right? It's kind of like that idea when you're in an airplane and the oxygen masks drop down. You got to put your own on first before you can put it on somebody else. And so we have this idea that self-care is selfish. But actually, the idea of self-care from a biblical standpoint, it's selfless. Jesus practiced self-care. He practiced taking care of himself so he would have something left to give to the people. And also, in that section of Mark chapter 1, the disciples come and say, "Hey, everybody's been looking for you. They're wondering where you're at." And he doesn't say, "Oh, well, I better get back to it." He says, "Let's go somewhere else so other people can experience this gospel as well," right? And so Jesus even said no or put limits to how much he could help a certain person in a certain location. Yet we feel like that we can't have any boundaries, that we can't say no, or we can't take a Sabbath. I would say if we don't have boundaries, if we don't take Sabbath, we will burn out and we will rust out altogether.
Yeah.
And so we have had to have that self-care where we take care of ourselves. It's good to be self-emptying. It's not, you can't just go away and make it all about you all the time. You got to come back to the people, right? But I don't know where we've gotten this sort of message that says you got to spend yourself completely every day, all day. It's just not sustainable.
What does the balanced, healthy, ideal Church of Christ ministry lifestyle look like? And I don't know why that question feels so weird to ask, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think a Sabbath day is so important and so countercultural in the world that we live in today.
Yep.
Most of us live on a vacation schedule. We're going to work ourselves to death for 3 months, and then I'm going to get myself on a beach and I'm going to have a great time. Then you come back and you got more work sitting on your desk than you had before you left.
Yep.
There's a reason that God created the Sabbath. It's a trust exercise. It's a way for us to, if you want to know how to rest, you got to know how to work. And if you want to know how to work, you got to learn how to rest.
Wow.
Right? And so I think about Matthew chapter 11:28. It's my life verse. "Come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls," right? So he says, "Come to me if you're weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." If there was a full stop right there, I mean, our church buildings would be packed because everyone would be coming to get rest. But the very next words out of Jesus' mouth after "I will give you rest" is "take my yoke upon you." So in a book called Discipleship, I think his name's Mike Breen, he talks about how oxen, you would never take a young oxen and put it on the same yoke with another young oxen. because the two would try to wear each other out, try to set the pace. They would go so quickly that by the time you got to lunchtime, these oxen are completely spent.
Yeah.
So you would always take a young oxen and yoke it with an older, experienced oxen at the plow. And that older oxen would determine
Interesting.
the pace and the rhythm. And then that young oxen becomes the old oxen, and then it trains another one, right? So when Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, he's saying, if you want to know how to rest, learn how to work at my pace and learn how to stop when I stop. And that's, it says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He's not going to give you this life that you can't manage. He's going to teach you how to manage life. And, when we look in Genesis chapter 1, all throughout it says there was evening and there was day. And it seems so backwards to us. We start in the morning and we end in the evening. But the day for the Jewish people, to this day, it's the same. The day for the Jewish people began when sun went down, not when sun came up, because you start with trust. You start with rest. And once you've trusted and rested in your God, then you're ready to get up and you're ready to go to work. And so I think if we are going to be balanced in ministry, there has got to be a Sabbath day. And sometimes we look at it and go, well, that's Old Testament. New Testament,
Right.
there's no sin against it. I'm like, if that is your outlook, I think we're looking at it wrong. We're given an opportunity to stop and rest. And I know ministers that won't take a day off because they feel like there's just so much to be done. They have to do it all. You will actually be better at your job if you will take Sabbath, right? If you will take that stop day, because I also needed time to pour into my family.
Yes.
I needed a day where I could just be off limits. And so I think if one is going to have a balanced life of ministry, Sabbath is a must.
This last question here, I want you to talk about Thrive. So you've created something called Thrive, and this is, I'd call it a ministry that is ministering to ministers. I don't know if they're already experiencing burnout or if this is something that's more preventative, but for those who are listening to this, and I know we have a lot of ministers and elders who listen to this show, describe what Thrive is and how they might get involved.
Yeah, I call it Thrive because I found so much of my ministry was just trying to survive. Let's just get through the day. And I felt a sense of guilt with that. Like, as a disciple of Jesus, I should learn how to find joy in every day. And my life should be more about thriving than surviving. But I started the Thrive cohort because what I needed more than anything when I was going through burnout was just companionship. And I needed to know that I wasn't alone. And I needed to know that there were people that I could network with. I needed those confidants, right?
Yes.
And so I wanted to start a Thrive cohort so that people could find their confidants, that there would be a safe place to go. It's not necessarily for people that are burnt out. Our cohorts are anywhere between 7 to 10 people. I try not to make them more than 10 because a big part of what we do is we just get together, we'll read a book together, we'll talk about some of the chapters, and then we'll just open it up. Like, are you experiencing that? Or are you experiencing something different? And just let us bounce ideas off each other. I love that networking aspect to it. And then the last 20 to 30 minutes of our session is just, how can we pray together? What are you going through? Because we don't want you to walk through it alone. And so they're not just burnout groups. They're confidant groups where we're getting together and having a safe space where you can give the 2%, right? And that takes time to develop. But we come together online. There's people from all over the country. We got Oregon, Wisconsin. We're all over the place, and we're getting to know each other. But we're developing this brotherhood, this fraternity, as we talk about doing life together in ministry. And so that was the whole purpose. I know it sounds pretty simple, and I think that's the whole point of it. It's just when I started going through burnout, I didn't know who to turn to with my questions. And I want a safe space where ministers can just be themselves. They don't have to be preacher so-and-so or youth minister so-and-so. They're just them. We do it online. We meet once a month. We have 5 sessions in the spring, and then we'll take a break for the summer, and I'll do a little bit more individualized calling and catching up with ministers one-on-one throughout the summer, and then we'll come back for the fall, and we'll end at the end of November. This is the first one I'm doing. We just started in January, so I don't have a whole lot of background I can give you, but if it goes well, I'm going to try to continue to do this, start a new cohort every January of 7 to 10 ministers. And I would love to, I know, it's a small group, and so if I could find other leaders that would be willing to take on a cohort and do these things as well, that might be, I just want us to have these networks. I want us to have these groups that we can go to and confide in.
That's excellent. We'll post links in the show notes, by the way, to all the books and resources that that Darrel has mentioned here. But Dr. Darrel Sears is founder of Thrive. It's a ministry by, for, and to ministers who are recovering from or trying to prevent ministry burnout. We'll put a link in the show notes, like I said. Darrel, ministers everywhere are thankful to you for being on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Let me take the time. It's a huge passion of mine. I want others in ministry to know that they're not alone, and they're not experiencing these things by themselves, and that there is a way for us to thrive, not just survive in ministry.
Good. Thank you so much. Grace and peace.
Thank you, sir.
We hope that something you heard in this episode encouraged, enlightened, or enriched you in some way. If it did, thanks be to God. And please pay it forward. Subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend. Recommend and review it wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Your subscription, recommendation, and review help us reach more people. Please send your comments, ideas, and suggestions to podcast@christianchronicle.org. And don't forget, our ministry to inform and inspire Christians and congregations around the world is a nonprofit ministry that relies on your generosity. So if you like the show and you want to keep it going and make it even better, please make a tax-deductible gift to the Christian Chronicle at christianchronicle.org/donate. The Christian Chronicle podcast is a production of the Christian Chronicle Incorporated, informing and inspiring Church of Christ congregations, members, and ministries around the world since 1943. The Christian Chronicle's managing editor is Calvin Cockrell, editor-in-chief Bobby Ross Jr., and president and CEO Eric Trigestad. The Christian Chronicle podcast is written, directed, and hosted by btirwin and recorded in Detroit, Michigan, USA. Editing, show notes, and transcript services by Kinsey James. Mastering, mixing, and sound quality by James Flanagan. Until next time, may grace and peace be yours in abundance.